go over the image with us.
I can go last
And
again.
on to our second team here. And we'll let them introduce themselves. They used to be 5. Now they're the brave 3. And we'll just hand it to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Merlet. Thank you everyone for being here and for all of those online as well for joining in today. My name is Michaela. I am in the marine biology department. I study ecology and physiology, specifically in marine mammals.
Hi, my name is Yowen Wang Alice, and I'm a third-year PhD student in CMSS. And my study area is statistical and mathematical modeling of species interaction and tested in oysters.
And my name is B. DeBona, or Elizabeth DeBona, professionally speaking. And I am a 4th-year PhD student in the MAR program. And then our other members also include Nigel, who will be recorded on his slides today. And then last semester, we also had Derry as a member who helped us with some of our initial data acquisition and cleaning. So.
Yeah, and so we partnered with Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch Association to tackle some of the questions and concerns that they had regarding seagrass health and ecosystem health right in their own backyard. So we're really excited to share with you what we have found during our time in stages this year. But before we get started, we would first like to express our sincerest condolences to IOB CWA, as well as the family of Jennifer Hilliard, who recently passed. Jennifer was the treasurer for IOB and was a vibrant and strong voice in their organization and did a lot of work to help preserve the natural communities that we have here in the Coastal Bend. And so we would like to dedicate this project and all future work pertaining to this research in her honor. And so as we move through this presentation, I just want to kind of give you a brief outline of what to expect. So we're first going to dive into the background and the data that were available to us for this research, walk you through how we process that data and some of the results that we found, and then give you our general conclusions and next steps potentially for cohort 2 if they wanted to kind of pick this up and keep going. And so diving into the story of this project, seagrass and seagrass beds are one of the most biologically diverse and productive ecosystems in the world, and they are home to thousands of species in the marine environment, and they provide numerous ecosystem services, so things like food and shelter, as well as nutrient cycling, and even enhancing the water quality in the ocean. And so with this promotion of biodiversity and support for other organisms, they also have this inherent economic value as well that's really important for coastal communities like we have here. But unfortunately, there are a lot of threats that seagrass face globally, one of the biggest being coastal development. So in coastal areas, we have a lot of vessel activity, dredging activities to support that expansion, as well as the subsequent nutrient and pollutant loading that comes along with it. And so in this top right image, we'll see that not only are these vessels and this dredging physically damaging to the seagrass, but they also disturb the benthic communities as well. So disturb that sediment and ultimately reduce the productivity of these seagrass communities and their ability to support this diversity. And this was a particular concern for our stakeholder partners because, as you can see here, extending from this Corpus Christi ship channel, we have the La Quinta channel, which is just adjacent to where they are located. And with Corpus having the #1 U.S. port in total revenue tonnage, that means we have a lot of vessels coming in and out on a daily basis, and a lot of negative effects as a result for our seagrass communities, especially in the Ingleside on the Bay area. And so some of the things that they've been seeing as a result of this vessel activity is, one, the sediment disturbance. This is an example of prop washing by these large vessels. As you can see, it's disrupting the sediment and again, reducing that productivity and not allowing enough sunlight to come through and help those seagrass beds grow. We're also just seeing the size of these vessels is so large and these channels are very shallow and narrow. And so it's causing these seagrass communities to recede. And ultimately, the seagrass communities that are near Ingleside on the Bay are becoming depleted. And so that was their really big concern, is what can we expect for the future of these seagrass communities and how can we take this to our community and help protect them. And so we were left with this question of how can we really help them do that, right? So how can we measure the health of these seagrass communities as well as the health of the ecosystem in that area for our partners? And to answer this question, we decided to look at 3 different kind of large parameters. And so the first being water quality indicators, things like temperature, pH, salinity, things that we know are main biological drivers for seagrass distribution in the natural environment. And we wanted to pair that with habitat quality indicators. So things like how are humans using the areas, how are these vessels having an impact, and also look at wildlife as well. So we know that seagrass supports abundant biodiversity. So looking at things like fish species composition and abundance and how they're using these areas, and ultimately what this means for the seagrass in its current state and what that could mean for the seagrass as we move forward. And so this was some of the data that were available to us. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot that was readily available for Ingleside on the bay itself. And so we decided to use the adjacent Redfish Bay to kind of analyze and compare our predictions to then apply to the Ingleside on the Bay area. And so we obtained water quality data from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Again, that temperature, pH, those water variables. We also obtained ship traffic data, including vessel speed, vessel size, vessel counts coming in and out of that area as well from NOAA. We have seagrass data from the Texas Seagrass Monitoring Program. So this includes percent coverage as well as images of seagrass over time. And then fish catch data using three different methods to observe that abundance in fish and the distribution over time as well from Texas Parks and Wildlife. And so this graph that we're seeing here is kind of where all of that data overlaps. As you can see, some of this data has been collected since the early 1970s. The ship traffic data we were only able to obtain starting in 2018. So we did struggle with having some of that data overlap, and we'll discuss that later. But this is kind of showing where our data overlapped and where we chose to focus this project. And so to give you a better idea of what some of this looked like, so this is a visual of the ship traffic data coming in and out of this area. We have the Gulf of Mexico out here and then Corpus Christi Bay. And really, I want to emphasize that this is showing the track lines of these vessels, and the colors represent the number of vessels that we're seeing. So this red line that we see even starting in 2018 is denoting that there were at least 1,500 or more vessels taking that route annually. So obviously right through the Corpus Christi ship channel into the inner bay, but we're also seeing up through Ingleside, as I mentioned, and even around Redfish Bay. So it's really important that we use this vessel data to be one of our predictors in our model later on. In terms of the seagrass data, as I mentioned, we did focus on the Redfish Bay area, and we decided to kind of divide this into a northern and southern region. So our northern region being north of that Texas 361 roadway. This is further from that major shipping channel, so it's our more pristine and less disturbed site. Whereas the seagrass measurements that we have on the south, those are closer to that main Corpus Christi shipping channel, closer to IOB, so going to be more closely related to what we can give our stakeholder partners. And then lastly, our fish catch data, as I mentioned, was collected in 3 different ways. So bay trawl, bag seine, and gill net. And the big takeaway from this is that we're able to capture a lot of diversity in these fish. So fish will use the environment differently at different stages in their life. And so by using these 3 different methods, we can really capture all the different stages of these fish species and look at how they're utilizing these seagrass communities differently in this area.
So overall, our research goals were first to determine the ecosystem health at Ingleside on the Bay, using those 3 different parameters: water quality, human interactions, and then also wildlife indicators. And then to determine the drivers of the seagrass health, so which variables are more important in determining sort of that seagrass health that we're defining. And then also to generate a predictive model so that we can sort of forecast what might be happening to the system in the future and use that to sort of like promote protection of this particular system. And so first, our data processing and results. So this is just an overview of the sort of pathway that we took. We again obtained data from many different sources, all sort of readily available open access data. The Texas Parks and Wildlife data, we did have to contact them directly to get the full set of data, the most recent, but most of it is online and available. And as you can see, we have a little bit of a difference in temporal scale. So the Texas Parks and Wildlife was a very large temporal scale compared to our seagrass, which is a little bit more concise. And so we looked at the different variables for these data sets and then converted them to some more usable variables for our models, and then ultimately ended up using the water quality and the seagrass and the fish data. And we did get to use the ship data directly in some of our models just because of the temporal scale and it being a little bit not overlapping with most of our seagrass data. So for our fish data, we had, again, Texas Parks and Wildlife did 3 different sampling methods. So we had access to all 3 sampling methods for the 30+ years. And so the different sampling methods targeted different species, some similar, some different. And so we looked at basically the composition of those species between the different methods, and then ultimately selected the top 5 from each sampling method. They recorded if there was ever an instance of it. So there might have been one fish in the 30 years and it was recorded and listed as a species. So it ended up being a data set with a lot of zeros. And so to mitigate that, we essentially used the 5 top species, which had the least number of zeros. And they ended up being sort of the most important species, both commercially, recreationally, and just of interest to us. So we used all 3 methods and 5 top species, so a total of 15 species in total for that. And then for the seagrass, we had 2 different areas, so Corpus Christi Bay and then the Redfish Bay area. And as you can see, they're slightly different in their overall coverage. That's kind of expected. Redfish Bay is a little bit more protected than Corpus Christi Bay, which has a little bit more ship traffic, both recreationally and commercially. So we just wanted to visualize the differences between those bays because we'll do predictive models for both of those. And so for the fish data and the seagrass data came to us as % coverage overall. So just an area, how much was covered in seagrass. And then also they went down to the specific species of seagrass, which species were more prominent over time. So we wanted to look at how that diversity might be changing over time. And we also converted the fish data to also a diversity index, because that gives us an overall sort of assessment, not just in pure number of fish, but in sort of the diversity of those fish species, as that might be a better indicator of ecosystem health and how many species it can support and how well it can support different types of species. So as you can see here, we have over time, we have a lot more data points for the fish because they were measured more like weekly and monthly throughout these many years versus the seagrass, which were measured at each site like once a year. And so we just have the diversity index as it changes over time. And so this will act as a predictor variable. And then we are trying to use the seagrass diversity index as a potential target in comparison to just % coverage as a target for our models.
It would be great if we could predict the seagrass coverage just like we predict weather. So I'm excited to share how our group deal with the prediction model. We use machine learning and deep learning model to try to predict the seagrass coverage. And first, I will introduce how we apply the machine learning and deep learning model to the Redfish Bay. Okay, so to form a prediction model, we will need some input variable that provides the information, and we will need a target variable, which is our target of interest. And our target variable is the percentage coverage of all seagrass, regardless of which of the 5 species of seagrass it is. And our input variable can mainly be divided to 3 aspects. The first aspect is the water quality data that was collected and measured at the same time they collected the seagrass coverage data. So it's paired. We have depths, water depths, pH, salinity, dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll A, total suspended solids, and water temperature. And the second aspect is the diversity index of fish. As you can see, we have fluctuations of fish diversity index over months, but that is for the whole bay. So we kind of make the variable for the whole bay for different stations and duplicate them. And the third variable is latitude and longitude that provides some information of the station location. And the figure shows the time dynamic of those input and target variable. The blue line is a target variable and other lines are our input variable, some of our input variable. You can see that they have the similar trend. For example, from 2012 to 2013, while the target variable dropped, other input also dropped. So we kind of believe that there might be some information embedded in the input variable that can help us predict the target variable. So the first variable we tried is the random forest variable for regression problem. In order to compare different variable, we use mainly those 4 metrics: mean square error, R square, mean absolute error, and RMSE. You can focus on the R square, which explain what percentage of variance the target variable can be explained by the input. So our baseline model gave a R square of 21%. It's like 21% of variance in the target variable can be explained by the input. We are trying to improve that, of course. And the MAE is the average of the distance between our prediction and our truth. So we want to minimize the MAE, and what's more, the MAE has the same scale of the target variable, so it's very good for interpretation. Right here, our MAE of our first model is around 22, which is if we predict a seagrass coverage to be 60%, the real percentage can be 80 or 40, plus and minus 22. Okay, and these figures shows our test result. Our trained model is the data we use to train the model is the data from 2011 to 2017, and after we train the model, we test them on the data of 2018, and this is the actual coverage with different color of shade representing different coverage. So this dark spot has low coverage. For example, if they are close to this highway and they have low coverage, and that is our prediction. We can see that they're not the same. So we use the third map to measure the error and visualize them. So the error is calculated as prediction minus the truth. So if it is red color, which means it's positive, it means the prediction is larger than the truth. So we over predict the seagrass coverage, which we can see close to that highway. There are some red dots, and close to the shoreline of mainland, there are also some real red dots. So they're not supposed to be that low, and we overestimated. So it means the real, it is really declining. And then when we try to improve the model performance, we look at the distribution of our target variable, which you can see from the histogram. It is skewed to the right, which means it's an imbalanced data, and we have less information on the when the coverage is low. We do not have enough cases. That might be the reason why we do not have a good prediction. Our coverage tends to predict on some higher coverage, but we fail to predict the lower coverage. So we apply the imbalanced data treatment. First one is a data augmentation, is that we manually add some variation to the data set, trying to make it more comprehensive and include more information. And the other is the oversampling. We trained on different oversampling factor, which is to duplicate the lower bound for 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And we also try different threshold for oversampling. For example, we oversample only the bottom 10% or the bottom 20% up until the bottom 50%. And we tried 3 times, 4 times, 5. We tried 60 different models with different combination of those parameters. And our best result is when we do no data augmentation, we do not manually add variation, and the oversampling factor is 1, so we only duplicate the lower bound 1, and the threshold we use to oversample is the bottom 10%. So right now our R square increased a little bit, and our MAE is still same, is still 20-ish, so we are still trying to improve that. But right now we can see that the error is still similar. The red dot, the declining part is still around the shoreline, and around near that highway. So also the darker color of error means that there is more uncertainty. So we should, the management should monitor them more closely because they are like very uncertain. And then another approach we use trying to improve the performance of the data is that we use a multimodal, which means we not only include the numeric model, a numeric variable to the for the model, we also try to include some images to the model. So thanks to Derry and Nigel, we downloaded some satellite image from Landsat USGS. They manually picked those a day that has low cloud coverage, so we can have good information. And then after we download an image for every year, because our seagrass is yearly, we cropped it to some boxes of 100 meters in length, and for different band, because USGS provide us with different bands. So our total is 72 station, and we have 10 channel. So this is an example of the cropped image that has 100 meters length and height, and they are all different. So what is the result? Unfortunately, it's not giving us good result. So the structure, if you're interested, we can show you. We basically first train, we first pair the image with a numeric variable, and then for the image part, we put them into a convolution neural network with different hypertuning parameters, such as different dropout layers or different those kernels, and then for the numeric variable, we feed them into a sequential neural network with different combination of dropout layers, neuron, and number of layers. And then after that, we combine the result of the fully of two model to one sequential neural network, and then further add some different parameter. And we trained for 90 trials, but the result, we picked the best model, but the result is that the MAE is reduced a little bit to 21. So our error is still plus and minus 21%. And we can see that this is a truth, this is a prediction. The error is that it systematically tends to overestimate the seagrass coverage, which we are trying to avoid. Maybe the second cohort can come up with some better model that can overcome this issue. Okay.
So the next slides are the ones that Nigel pre-recorded. So it's going to come from this laptop. So hopefully all of you can hear it.
Good morning, class. This is Nigel Lascelles, and I'll be presenting on seagrass coverage prediction for Corpus Christi Bay. Here's an image of ship vessel counts that travel through or around Corpus Christi Bay annually. They are classified by color for their frequency, with red being the highest of 1,500 plus ships. We decided to test our neural network with the whole bay system because data from the Redfish Bay that Alice just spoke on did not yield us good results. Next slide, please. Much like Redfish Bay, our model did not produce good results, with our target variable being % coverage all grass. Random forest model produced a mean square error that is very high while also having an R-square value that is very low, meaning using random forest for our data set, even with more location points, gives a very, very poor overall accuracy of the model in the prediction. Although our R-square value did increase with the addition of location points, it still shows a very low accuracy and the model is not working very well. In the maps below, you see the actual % coverage of all grass in 2018, the predicted % coverage of all grass in 2018, and the predicted error in 2018. The actual percent coverage of all grass is from our data set. And the predicted percent coverage of all grass is from the random forest model. Like I stated before, the model did not give us good results, and the map shows that. The darker color locations show some type of uncertainty as in compared to the actual percent coverage all grass. And that's why you can see in the predicted and in the predicted error that those same areas are a little bit similar. The next method we used was imbalance treatment to add variation to our data set so that we may couple it with oversampling to enhance model performance. We use 1 to 4 times for low values of oversampling factors and oversampling threshold percentiles of 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, and 60%, hoping to see a better accuracy within our model, which did not happen, although our R-squared value did increase slightly and our mean absolute error value decreased only slightly. But that is something that we would want to see as a trend, but the model did not perform well. The imbalance treatment method actually did improve the predicted percent coverage of all grass in 2018. Those same darker color locations of seagrass that actually gotten a little bit lighter as far as in this map. And this shows that the accuracy has changed a little bit, but it's still not proficient enough to actually make reasonable predictions. Struggling to improve our model, we decided to change target variables, looking at the Shannon Diversity Index of seagrass, using only locations from Ingleside on the Bay. This trial did not improve the accuracy of the model, but we do see that there's a significant decrease in mean square error and the mean absolute error, which is something we look for as far as accuracy in predictive models. But the low R-squared value tells us all that we need to know. So we built a chart to look at the model comparison of random forest data transformation models that we did not discuss today, but will at a later date, and the imbalance treatment coupled with oversampling in Redfish Bay and Corpus Christi Bay. The chart shows us that all the R-squared values in both bay systems are very low. But some positive towards our model building is that with data transformation and the imbalance treatment, we were able to increase the accuracy of the R-squared, even if it was very minute. The data transformation model actually gave us good results as far as mean square error and mean absolute error, where we see that in both Redfish Bay and Corpus Christi Bay, those numbers are lower than the averages from other models that we did. With all that said, our model fell short of the goal of reaching the accurate prediction of future seagrass in the Ingleside on the Bay area. With improved data collection and also improved data sets, this model can be used to find accuracy as far as predictions for the future of seagrass coverage in the Ingleside on the Bay and other bay systems near it.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. So next we'll talk about our conclusions and next steps. So our conclusions are also our struggles. We basically did not have enough data. We had hoped to get more. So while we were using still a big data set, the model would be improved by just more data points. And then also, just to point out, our data, again, was not producing the most accurate model, essentially overestimating seagrass coverage, which would be like what we would not want. We would rather underestimate seagrass coverage than overestimate, as far as like providing evidence that there's some sort of negative impact to the seagrass system health. So our next steps, or well, maybe the next cohort's next steps would be to obtain higher resolution satellite imagery, and so that we can use that as like an addition to our data set that we don't have currently, and then to obtain latest seagrass coverage, so more recent data, and also ship traffic data to overlap. So again, we couldn't use the ship traffic in our model simply because it started in 2018, which is where it ended for the rest of our stuff. So adding that human impact as a confounding factor for predicting seagrass health, as we are predicting that that is what's majorly impacting it. That would be beneficial to our model. And to, again, compare different bays, because this type of model will be very specific to the location that you're using, like, types of bays and things like that, where seagrass might even be present, because you're not going to predict seagrass where there wouldn't be seagrass growing anyway. And so, again, we will try machine learning, deep learning techniques, and advanced geospatial learning models. And then for the fish data, we could look at some different aspects. So again, we just use the diversity of the fish. It comes to us as pure fish counts at a certain time. And so we could look at the age structure of the fish to tell a little bit more about the diversity and what these systems are able to support, which could give us more like variables as far as what is best indicating sort of seagrass coverage and health. And then also, again, track that diversity over time and how that might change. Again, expanding our time frame would give us sort of a better visualization of that. And then find relationships between fish and water quality. So maybe target species that are more reflective of water quality parameters and thus reflective of seagrass health. And so then we also want to look at species and model development, looking at the selection again of the species and the model prediction. So how that might help us with our lagged variables. And we hope to maybe use explainable AI, I'm covering it, to use to decipher our model predictions and identify key influencers. So we want to thank Stages, obviously, for allowing us the time and tools to do this, and then Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch Association as our very interactive stakeholder in helping us with this project, informing our questions. And now we'll take questions. Nigel can't take questions, but we will take Nigel's questions.
It's interesting because when you for people of the public, oftentimes when you do models, you don't get a good result. Those don't get published. You don't publish that, but it's still a lot of work, right? So although everything I said to the other group is still kind of relevant, y'all work with a stakeholder that's the public, which is a really interesting, neat thing to do. And unfortunately, scientists could spend their whole career never talk to a member of the public ever, right? So I'm curious, how did all of that go? And did any of that of discussing with your stakeholder, drove the project and changed the way you had? And did you learn ways to communicate? As an expert, did you find those situations where you're speaking Greek to them or back and forth?
Well, we were very lucky. I think our stakeholders may be more educated on the subject than even we were initially, simply because they live in Ingleside on the Bay and they witnessed firsthand sort of the issue, and then they brought that to light. So they are very in-depth. We went on a little field trip with them, and they sort of explained to us, this is what we're seeing, and we were able to see sort of firsthand what their problem was, and that sort of helped us grasp what might be good influencers for predicting sort of what this problem is and helping them sort of display that to their community so that they can get resources for protecting their local areas. So we were, I think, fortunate that our public was very educated. As far as the modeling, I'm not even very educated in the modeling techniques. I learned a lot. So I think that we tried to present it in a way that the models make sense to the general public and not as much just like numbers, because sometimes numbers can be very confusing, but we wanted to give the actual endpoints of our models. I don't know. Do you guys have something to add? Okay, no.
I just want to thank you for recognizing Jennifer. She was a true science at heart, and she loved the work that she did. Thank you for recognizing her. Yeah, I think it's very difficult what you had to take on. This is a complex job. To me, as just looking at Google Maps, and you can really see the changes over time. If you go into Google Pro and you go back to 1950s, and just looking through those data sets, to me, as a layman, as a tax scientist, I call myself, that's to me, I can recognize the changes. So maybe going to the next level and looking at better imagery, that may help.
There's a question online from Catherine Maston. Do you have other ideas for what kind of data might be more predictive? For example, were you able to bring in any TCEQ water pollution data, like TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, of specific pollutants that TCEQ permits?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We are trying to map the TCEQ data to the our Seagrass data, but the overlapping is like not that much, and because the TCEQ we have the underground water, which is like underground water, and some and some measurement in the bay, which we can show you in the lunchtime where they overlap, and it's just easier for us to just use the water quality data that was measured at the time and space when the seagrass measurement is taken. But it will help if we could get a higher resolution of seagrass data, because currently our seagrass data is yearly. We only have one measurement per year, and we don't know when that measurement was taken time. So it's kind of hard for us to map the water quality of TCEQ to the seagrass, because we don't know when and where we should look for the measurements.
Yeah, so we temporarily and spatially, we had to overlap our data for it to make sense. And so we struggled with our data sets being similar enough because they were taken by so many different, agencies and people. So it's like comparing that and how they took it and how precise they were, things like that are a bit of a struggle for us. But there are a lot of factors that we're not obviously considering in this model. The Bay system is very chaotic in the different things that influence seagrass health. And so we tried to get as many indicators as we could that would overlap. But yes, pollutants, and again, including this traffic data, and then just like other human activities on land and things like that, that might contribute to poor water quality and things like that, would potentially help us predict better seagrass health.
The NOAA ship traffic data that you have, if NOAA has data on a ship movement, then the ship has to have an AIS system on it, which means it's over 79 feet. So Redfish Bay, where you're looking at seagrass data, is a shallow area, but I would venture my next year's salary that there's more boat traffic in that shallow bay than what you have being accounted for on the NOAA data, just because it's recreational boats, right? But it's in shallower water, so it does cut seagrass, it's suspended sediment, it does everything like that. I'd be really interested if someone took this to go forward, because TCQ collects data on quarters. It's like, so there's not a lot of data. I mean, we're really compared to some other agencies that are more intensive in a short duration of time. But, and since seagrass is only collected once a year, and it's and you don't know when,
right?
If you could develop a model that would predict an algae which grows at a faster rate and maybe even grows up at the top of the column to where it'd be less impacted by variables, maybe like boat traffic. And the public use for that at this time in the state of Texas would be these new oyster farms are coming online. The biggest issue that they're dealing with is biofouling of the cages. The cages are on the top of the water column. If there was a way to predict when the cage was going to get biofouled to a break point where the owner had to go clean it, you might save them some boat trips out to the bay to go, because if they don't clean the cage, the oysters die.
Right.
But if you could develop a model that would say, okay, under this temperature, under this rainfall amount, whatever it might be, whatever the variables are, you've got another week before you need to go do that. You'd save them some labor driving out to go do it. So I mean, just something to think of, some group later down the line wanting to look at algae accumulation.
So it was interesting to me that your models over-predicted continuously. So, I mean, it's obvious that you're missing some factors, right? And you say collect more data, but it's like a different parameter.
Right.
Because the parameters you're feeding it, even if you weigh them, because you put in boat traffic and you weighed that, and that's still not hitting that the total R squared. But yet, when you run the model, it's saying there should be a lot more seagrass than there is. So what it kind of, just using Sherlock Holmes, there's got to be some other parameter that's occurring that is mortality on the seagrass that's not being ingested in the model. Some new bit, either that's pollution or something, or algae or something.
Right.
And so that say like this is a non-result, as in you couldn't predict it, but it does give you, like, I think if another group wants to take it on, gives you something that, hey, this is pointing out there's got to be some other factor involved with it. That's what I take.
Yeah, I think one of our things was also like our locations were just locations. They weren't necessarily like, we saw a lot of issues in proximity to like roadways and shorelines and things like that. And so those weren't necessarily taken into consideration, like where, if the location was close to a point like that. And so adding that in some way to the model might better tell you that like these areas are more higher risk, and sort of like giving risk to certain areas, as well as like measuring areas that don't have seagrass, because like they used to have seagrass, but now they don't. That's not, they didn't measure it because they could only measure % coverage. And if it's not there, they're not gonna, they didn't put necessarily 0% coverage unless it started with some seagrass. And so having that on the lower end might help our model a little bit better.
Yeah, I like that note. I do think, yes, I agree with you that adding more environmental variables, even land use, some of that information may help the data, but as you guys very much highlighted in your approach, which I really appreciated, the imbalance and transformative approach to your utilization of machine learning tools, it really was the lack of seagrass, and knowing that most of the time looking at that seagrass data set, they were oversampling the amount of seagrass that was in it. So the real reason for their over prediction and sampling for seagrass was because that's what they had in their sampling data set. So you could add a whole bunch of other variables,
Zero space, yeah.
You need a better representative target so that their model is better.
And I think our model also, while it's not very accurate, it does sort of like present to everyone, okay, this is where we need data. This is like, so you can then present, okay, like we'd love to be able to model this as like a tool for our community, but we need funding and resources to get this kind of data so that it's an accurate type of model and that it can actually be useful to the public. So
I would add to this, because you mentioned, when the seagrass data were collected, and even if you had water quality measurements, you would know if they corresponded to the time of the year when the seagrass data were collected. So are these data sets from different entities?
which ones?
Like the seagrass, the water quality, whatever data sets you could combine to use to predict, they're not coming from one sea, right?
Well, the seagrass data also had like in the same data set water quality, and the fish data in the same data set water quality for the fish. So those exact points. Yeah. And then we also had a separate water quality data set that was just water from TCEQ. So we had, yeah, so we ended up using the water that was linked to the seagrass just for spatially and temporally, like it was, we assumed at the same exact spot and the same exact location, because that was what was on there. Whether or not they were just writing down the same location and it was slightly different, we're not sure. This wasn't very clean data per se.
So
but
did you advise that maybe state agencies work together to make sure they're maybe providing data sets that can be useful, that they're collected at the same time, that provide sufficient information to be used, but in a collective effort, just make sure you do have some sort of overlap and that you are complementing each other. Because everybody is just having their own agenda and just trying to do their own thing, and then ultimately we are trying to give back, but we are limited by this kind of discrepancies.
yeah, some standardization of sampling would be good.
Yeah, it would, it would be great if the station location of those different agencies, like they are close to each other. So when we, it will be easier for us to map different data set together. So we can have a more comprehensive data set.
Yes.
I would just need to say, because I work with seagrass too, seagrass is really hard to study. It's so finicky. it's like coral, except people don't pay as much attention to it. So it's like trying to solve the Great Barrier Reef problem, but you don't have any data.
Yeah.
So it's really finicky, and honestly, you made a really good point. I didn't think about the recreational boats, because the ones where it's really bad over prediction. They are next to a coastline where people watch their boats and fish, and the net, like the nets and everything get tangled and rip it out. So it's really difficult to measure seagrass, and so I think the model itself isn't necessarily a problem. I think it's like you said, like the data is just so everywhere, and there's no uniform way. People don't do it all the same way, like they said, so it's just very biased, and you can't see it, so it's hard to get a good result.
Yeah, if we tried to model like a pristine, untouched seagrass bay, obviously, I think our model would do a better job.
Yeah.
But the human interaction is, I think, the main thing we're missing, which is not just one thing, it's also like many components. So that's like really hard to put into numbers.
Question and suggestion. So the skill of the model is a problem to really draw conclusions. So far, yeah, I think you guys have more data. But going back on the comments that there's variables that are not included, is it looks like there's spatially consistent spots where there's more over prediction than others, and so pointing out where the model failed the most. Could we say that it's an index of where there is other variables that are in most at play, and could that then be? And I think to make that conclusion, the model would have to work better. But maybe for another group, that maybe. What do you guys think? Is that
Yeah, I mean, like these locations, so like this is like, the truthing, but then this is like the error rate. Like it seems to always be like this little area and like this little area. So the shallow areas where probably a lot of recreation and people are actually there, like messing with the seagrass essentially. So I don't know how you would, like what variable you would use to do that, like number of boat launch, if someone took surveys or things like that, like you'd have to find some sort of like numerical way of like giving that and putting that into the model, but it's probably a human use or like a runoff thing or something like that.
Did you have turbidity?
We had total suspended solids, yes.
Because, if it's disturbance.
Yeah, but
it's
again,
shallow.
that's only taken when the sample was taken, so it's a little bit biased at that particular moment. So like an overtime situation, more repeated measurements would probably give you a better overview of what's actually going on.
You could tighten your model up right inside of the Redfish Bay State Scientific Research Area, assuming that the game wardens are watching for boats uprooting seagrass in there, and then use that and see how good do you predict there. Because that would at least allow you to eliminate all the additional shallow water boat traffic from the other areas by knowing what happens inside of that area.
Yeah.
It's small, but you'd have to plot it out and find out where do your dots fit.
Yeah, if we could get records of tickets or warnings for the seagrass beds, that would be.
And another suggestion is actually look at another nearby area like Oasis Delta, or an area that has less traffic, because they're going to be pretty similar. But like just exactly the same suggestion, if you have an area that or like in the nerve that's not going to be as touched, that you can use as the calibration and then validate it here, because then
we could prove that it's not, that's
right.
Yes, I have the same introspective question, which helps both the next cohorts and also the organizers to know where to make modifications. So you had to do it again. What would you do different?
I think, I don't know who it was, someone said it earlier, but seeing the data that's available before you take on the project, I think would be a good thing, because I personally was a little disappointed that we couldn't give more to our stakeholders that they were really wanting, just because there wasn't enough there for us to use. And so we had to look at a different location. So I think that would probably be the biggest thing right off the bat, is to know what you're working with.
Yeah, I agree with Michaela. In the summer, we spent few weeks just trying to visualize different data set individually, but end up finding that they cannot be mapped together. So some of the work was like kind of wasted. So it's good if you just check the time and location scale of those data set before you ever visualize them or analyze them.
Yeah, I guess I would say that this is like sort of towards my interest anyway, but like staying with a project that's sort of towards your interest, I think that is important. And then going and finding what data might be available that interests you, and then like communicating that to your stakeholder. This is what we can find. What kind of question would you like to ask? And like then formulating a question with them after knowing what is available to you, because they may also not know what's available to them. We all have these like burning questions, but we don't know what's available for us to answer those questions. So knowing that ahead of time, like having your own sort of passion and idea behind the project is also helpful for getting through the long period of time, which it will be very frustrating. Any more questions? You can do this project next year if you want to.
Thank you.